The dangerous habit of settling. Why mediocrity is destroying your life. Part 1. The first time I realized I was settling for less. I remember the moment clearly. It was a Tuesday, just like any other, but something felt off. I was sitting in my office, looking at my reflection in the glass window, and I realized I wasn't happy. In fact, I hadn't been happy for a long time. I had settled. I had settled for a job that didn't excite me, a relationship that no longer fulfilled me, and a lifestyle that didn't challenge me in any way. But I didn't even notice it at first. It was subtle. I kept telling myself that it was fine. This is good enough, I thought. Maybe this is just how life is supposed to be. I convinced myself that I was okay with the status quo. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. I knew I was capable of more. And that's when it hit me. Settling isn't just about accepting less. It's about closing the door on your true potential. It's a slow, silent killer that keeps you from becoming who you were meant to be. And once I realized that, everything changed. But that was only the beginning. Part 2. The realization that I was wasting my time. It didn't happen overnight, but the signs were there, if I was willing to look for them. I spent years avoiding the truth, telling myself that I was waiting for the right moment to make a change. But deep down, I knew. The right moment never comes if you keep putting it off. I remember sitting on the couch one evening, scrolling through my phone, just mindlessly passing the time. I'd spent hours that day working at a job I didn't love, in a career I was no longer passionate about. But I kept telling myself it was fine. That's just how things were. As I stared at the screen, I realized I was wasting time that I could never get back. And that's when it hit me. I had spent years in this cycle, telling myself I was content, when in reality, I was stuck. The worst part? I wasn't alone. I knew plenty of people doing the same thing. People who were stuck in relationships that drained them, careers that didn't inspire them, and habits that were slowly eating away at their soul. The lie we tell ourselves is that it's good enough. But that's the danger of complacency. We fool ourselves into believing that just because something isn't awful, it's okay. It's not. The truth was, I was wasting my life. And worse, I was letting fear control me. Fear of change. Fear of failure. Fear of leaving my comfort zone. But I realized something that night. Fear is the enemy of growth. You can either stay in the safe zone, slowly dying inside, or you can take the leap and start fighting for the life you deserve. And that's when I made my decision. The question was no longer about when I would make a change, but how. Part 3. The struggle of breaking free. Breaking free wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The moment I decided to change, I thought it would be a smooth, quick transition. I was wrong. It felt like I was climbing an endless mountain, and with every step, the weight of my past choices seemed to grow heavier. I had been living in denial for so long that confronting my reality felt like walking into the unknown. I remember the first time I told my friends and family that I was going to make a change. I could see the doubt in their eyes, the skepticism. "You've been fine for so long. Why mess with a good thing?" they'd ask. And for a second, I questioned myself too. Was I making a mistake? Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just being impulsive. But deep down, I knew the truth. I couldn't keep living this way. The fear of regret, of looking back in 5 years and seeing that I'd done nothing to improve my life, was worse than any discomfort I'd face in making the change. So, I pushed through the fear. I quit my job, ended a relationship that wasn't right for me anymore, and started making choices that felt uncomfortable, but were necessary for growth. It was exhausting. The doubts, the second-guessing, and the loneliness. I felt like I was starting from scratch, and it often felt like the world around me didn't understand why I was doing it. But the more I pushed through, the more I realized something. Change doesn't come from comfort. It comes from stepping into the discomfort, the unknown, and being willing to fight for what you want, even when it feels impossible. And that's when things started to shift. Slowly, but surely, the pieces began to fall into place. The life I had settled for was crumbling, but in its place, a new one was beginning to take shape. Part 4. The real cost of settling. At first, I didn't realize just how much I had sacrificed by staying in my comfort zone for so long. Sure, I had avoided the pain of change, but what I didn't see was the price I had paid. The dreams I never chased, the relationships I neglected, and the parts of myself that I allowed to wither away. One of the hardest realizations was understanding that settling didn't just cost me my happiness in the moment. It had cost me my future. I had so many plans, so many goals that I had put on the back burner. I told myself I would get to them later. But later never came. Each day I spent waiting for the right time was a day I could never get back. I realized that by choosing comfort over challenge, I had inadvertently chosen mediocrity. I had let fear dictate my actions, letting it keep me from stepping up and taking the risks necessary to truly live the life I wanted. Looking back, I could see all the opportunities one had missed simply because I was too comfortable to take a chance. The worst part? I had convinced myself that this was just the way life was. I didn't know how many chances I had thrown away until I made the decision to take control. The cost of settling wasn't just the missed opportunities. It was also the impact it had on the relationships that mattered most. The people who were affected by my complacency, my lack of action, and my inability to speak up about what I truly wanted. And that's when I understood, settling is a slow, silent killer. It doesn't just rob you of your future. It quietly destroys everything around you. But waking up to that truth was the first step toward rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way forward. Part 5. The moment I realized I was finally free. Breaking free from the shackles of mediocrity wasn't an overnight thing. It wasn't as simple as just quitting my job or walking away from the relationships that no longer served me. It was a process, one that took time, self-reflection, and a lot of uncomfortable decisions. But there was a moment, a defining moment, when I realized that I was finally starting to live for myself and not for anyone else's expectations. It happened one morning, a few months after I had made the decision to take charge of my life. I woke up early, for the first time in a long time, feeling a sense of purpose. I wasn't rushing through my day to just get it over with. I wasn't trying to numb myself with distractions. For the first time, I felt present in my own life, and it felt empowering. I sat down with a cup of coffee, and I realized that the weight that had been holding me down, the weight of complacency and self-doubt, was slowly lifting. I was no longer living in the shadow of fear. I had stepped into the discomfort and faced my own demons, and now I was beginning to see the results. But it wasn't just about the external changes. It was about how I felt on the inside. I had stopped living for others' approval and had started focusing on my own growth. It wasn't about perfection, but about progress. The first steps were the hardest, but with each decision to move forward, I felt more confident in my ability to handle whatever came my way. In that moment, I knew that freedom wasn't about escaping my responsibilities or avoiding discomfort. It was about choosing to take control, no matter how difficult the path. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And for the first time in a long time, I could honestly say I wasn't settling anymore. I was living life on my own terms. Part 6. The struggles that came with real change. As much as I wish I could tell you that once I broke free from my past, everything just fell into place and life became smooth sailing, that would be a lie. Real change is messy. It's difficult. It's not as simple as snapping your fingers and suddenly having everything you've ever wanted. It's about making choices every day that move you closer to the person you want to be, but those choices don't always feel rewarding right away. The first few months after I started making these changes were rough. I had to get comfortable with the discomfort. When you decide to step out of your comfort zone, you'll find that the universe doesn't just hand you everything you want on a silver platter. In fact, it tests you. The people around you might not understand why you're doing what you're doing. Some might question your decisions, others might try to hold you back, and you might even start doubting yourself. One of the biggest struggles I faced was the loneliness that came with change. As I started to remove myself from situations and people that were keeping me stuck, I realized that I was walking down a different path than many of the people I had been surrounded by. Some of them didn't understand the changes I was making, and to be honest, some of them resented me for it. I had to deal with the guilt of leaving behind relationships that no longer aligned with who I was becoming. It wasn't that these people were bad, it's just that I had outgrown them. And that realization stung. But I had to remind myself that real growth often requires letting go of things that no longer serve you, no matter how hard it is. In those moments of struggle, I wanted to give up. I wanted to go back to the safety of my old life, the one that felt comfortable, even though I knew it wasn't right. But something inside me refused to settle. I had already come too far, and I wasn't about to turn back now. Real change, I learned, isn't about avoiding the hard moments. It's about facing them head-on, knowing that each challenge is a step toward becoming the person you were always meant to be. The journey isn't easy, but it's always worth it. Part 7. Rebuilding my relationships from the ground up. When I started to change my life, the most unexpected thing happened. It wasn't just about me anymore. The people closest to me, the ones who had been there through the good and bad, suddenly found themselves affected by the shifts I was making. Some embraced it, others resisted, and some even pushed back entirely. But the truth is, when you start improving yourself, it inevitably impacts the people around you. I had been so focused on my own growth that I didn't anticipate the tension it might cause in my relationships. For years, I had been settling for unhealthy dynamics, and now, as I began to elevate my life, those relationships had to either evolve with me or, in some cases, fall apart. I remember one of the most difficult conversations I had with a close friend. They couldn't understand why I was making such drastic changes. I could see the confusion in their eyes as they tried to process everything. They felt left behind, and for a while, it felt like I was abandoning them. But it wasn't about leaving them. It was about making space for both of us to grow. I had to have some brutally honest conversations, where I admitted my own faults. I apologized for the times I had settled in our friendships and relationships, not being fully present or honest. And in turn, I asked for the same honesty and effort from them. It wasn't always easy. Some relationships fell apart completely, and that hurt. But I also began to rebuild new ones, relationships that were based on mutual respect, trust, and the willingness to grow together. I realized that true connection comes when you stop hiding behind your comfort zone and let others see you for who you truly are. And then there were the relationships that survived the change, the ones that evolved because we were both willing to grow. These relationships became stronger, more authentic, and more fulfilling. They were no longer based on who we were in the past, but who we were becoming together. And that was one of the most rewarding parts of the entire journey. Realizing that true, meaningful connections are born out of personal transformation, not from staying stuck. Through it all, I learned that the strongest relationships are the ones where both people are committed to evolving, even if it means facing the uncomfortable truth about themselves and each other. Part 8. The battle with doubt and fear of failure. Even after all the changes I had made, there was still one enemy I couldn't shake: doubt. No matter how many steps I took toward a better life, that nagging voice in the back of my mind kept reminding me of the risks, the potential for failure, and the fear of falling short. The deeper I got into this journey of transformation, the more I realized how deeply ingrained fear and self-doubt were in my life. I had spent so many years letting fear control my decisions, convincing myself that the safe route was the best. And even now, as I faced the uncertainty of building a new life, doubt seemed to be a constant companion. There were days when I questioned everything: the decisions I had made, the risks I had taken, and whether I was actually capable of pulling this off. I thought about how easy it would be to go back to my old, comfortable life, even though I knew it would only lead me back to the same place I was before, stuck, complacent, and unfulfilled. But I also realized something important during this time. Fear isn't something you can outrun. It's something you need to confront head-on. You can't wait for the fear to go away before you take action. It won't. The key is to take action in spite of the fear. I had to redefine my relationship with failure. I had spent so much time avoiding failure, thinking it was something to fear, but the truth was, failure was just another step in the process. It was a sign that I was pushing myself, testing my limits, and growing. If I wasn't failing, then I wasn't trying hard enough. So, instead of letting doubt paralyze me, I began to use it as fuel. I turned my fear into motivation. Every time that voice whispered that I couldn't do it, I took a step forward. And while the fear never truly went away, I learned to live with it and use it to drive me. The journey wasn't about eliminating doubt or fear. It was about learning how to keep moving forward, even with those feelings right by my side. The moment I stopped letting fear dictate my life was the moment I truly started to live. Part 9. The power of consistency in creating lasting change. The hardest part about change wasn't the big decisions. It was the small, everyday actions that followed. In the beginning, I was excited. I had momentum. I was making drastic shifts in my life, cutting ties with what was holding me back, and carving out new paths that felt right. But after a while, the excitement faded, and the reality set in. Transformation wasn't about a one-time act of courage. It was about consistent effort over time. The real challenge came in staying committed to the changes, even when the initial energy wore off. I had to remind myself every single day that growth is a daily practice, not a single event. It was easy to feel overwhelmed, especially when results didn't show up immediately. There were days when I doubted whether all the work was worth it. The path ahead still seemed long and uncertain. But then I realized something crucial. Success doesn't come from the bursts of enthusiasm. It comes from the quiet moments, the times when no one is watching, and when you're just putting in the work because you know it's the right thing to do. It's those little, consistent actions, whether it's sticking to a new habit, facing a fear, or simply showing up for yourself every day, that compound over time and lead to lasting change. I started to embrace the grind. I learned that consistency wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about always being at my best, always feeling motivated, or always succeeding. It was about making the decision to keep going, no matter what. Each time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself that real change doesn't happen overnight. It happens in the everyday choices, in the moments when you decide to keep going, even when the finish line seems far out of sight. And as time went on, I started seeing results, not just in my career or relationships, but in my mindset, my discipline, and my ability to face challenges head-on. The more consistent I was, the more I realized that small changes, made consistently, were more powerful than any dramatic transformation could ever be. The key to lasting change isn't in the big breakthroughs. It's in the small, consistent steps you take every day. The difference between who you were and who you want to become is built on those daily actions. And once I understood that, I knew that the effort, no matter how difficult or slow it felt, was always worth it. Part 10. The freedom that comes from embracing responsibility. As I continued on this journey of transformation, something else became clear to me. The freedom I was seeking wasn't just about breaking free from my past habits or circumstances. It was about taking full responsibility for my life, my choices, and the consequences of both. For years, I had been blaming external factors for my unhappiness. I blamed my job, my relationships, my upbringing, anything and everything except myself. I thought that if I could just change these external things, I would finally be happy. But the more I changed, the more I realized that the real freedom came when I stopped looking outside for answers and started looking inward. Taking responsibility wasn't about placing blame on myself or feeling guilty for past mistakes. It was about recognizing that I had the power to shape my future through the choices I made today. Every decision I made was mine, and with that came the power to create the life I wanted. This was a huge shift in mindset. I stopped seeing myself as a victim of circumstances and started viewing myself as the creator of my own destiny. I realized that even when life throws challenges my way, as it inevitably will, it's up to me how I respond. It was no longer about waiting for things to change or for the world to give me what I thought I deserved. It was about creating the changes I wanted to see and stepping into the discomfort of responsibility. The power of responsibility is that it puts you in control. It removes the excuses and the what-ifs. I stopped asking why things weren't going my way and started asking, what can I do to make it happen? The answer was always within me. It was up to me to take action, to show up, and to create the life I truly wanted. This new mindset wasn't easy to adopt. There were still times when I wanted to fall back into old habits and blame everything around me for my problems. But every time I caught myself doing that, I reminded myself that I was in charge. That freedom, the freedom of owning my choices and taking full responsibility for my life, became the most empowering feeling I've ever experienced. True freedom comes not from escaping life's challenges, but from embracing the responsibility that comes with them. And once I did that, everything started falling into place. My mindset shifted, my actions aligned with my goals, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely in control of my life. Part 11. The realization that growth never ends. One of the biggest surprises on this journey was realizing that growth doesn't have a finish line. There's no point where you can say, I've made it. I'm done. In fact, the moment I thought I had reached my destination was the moment I realized I had only scratched the surface. When I first started this journey, I thought there would come a time when I would have everything figured out, when the struggles would end, and life would become this steady, smooth ride. But as I kept pushing forward, I learned a painful truth. Growth is not linear. It's not a straight line toward success. It's a series of ups and downs, breakthroughs and setbacks, progress and plateaus. I found myself facing new challenges that I wasn't prepared for, even after everything I had already overcome. It wasn't because I had failed, it was because growth never stops. The more I learned, the more I realized how much there still was to learn. The more I achieved, the more I realized that each victory was just one step on a much larger journey. This realization wasn't discouraging. In fact, it was liberating. It meant that I wasn't stuck in a race to reach a particular destination. It meant that I could continue evolving, becoming better, stronger, wiser for the rest of my life. And that's the beauty of personal growth. It's not about reaching a point of perfection. It's about becoming a better version of yourself every day. No matter how much you achieve or how far you go, there's always room for more growth, more improvement, more learning. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was on a path of constant evolution. There was no end to reach, and that freed me from the pressure of perfection. I didn't have to have it all figured out. I just had to keep going, keep learning, and keep improving. And that was enough. The truth is, I'll never stop growing. And that's okay. The journey doesn't have a finish line. It's an ongoing process of becoming the person I'm meant to be, one decision at a time. And now, I embrace it fully. I no longer fear the unknown. I'm excited for it, because I know that the best version of myself is always just a step away. Part 12. Finding peace in the present moment. As I continued my journey, I began to notice something I had completely overlooked for most of my life: the present moment. I had spent so many years chasing after the next big goal, the next accomplishment, the next step in my personal transformation, that I had neglected the simple, quiet power of now. In the past, I always thought that peace and fulfillment would come when I achieved the next thing. When I landed the perfect job, reached a certain level of success, or found the right relationship, that's when I would finally be content. But after all the changes I had made, I realized that peace doesn't come from external circumstances. It comes from within. It was a subtle shift, but one that changed everything. I stopped looking for happiness in the future and started finding it in the present. I began to appreciate the small moments: a quiet morning with a cup of coffee, a conversation with a friend, the feeling of the sun on my face, the peace of just being alive. It sounds simple, but it was something I had missed for so long. I had been so focused on achieving, on changing, on becoming the person I thought I needed to be, that I forgot to just be. I was constantly striving, constantly looking ahead, without ever taking the time to appreciate the journey itself. But when I began to focus on the present moment, I realized that life wasn't just about the destination. It was about enjoying the process, the growth, and the moments that make up each day. This shift in mindset didn't mean I stopped working toward my goals. It didn't mean I gave up on my dreams or stopped pushing myself to grow. But it meant that I stopped sacrificing my happiness for something that was always just out of reach. I stopped waiting for the perfect moment and started living fully in the moment I was in. The truth is, peace isn't something you find in the future. It's something you create in the present. And once I realized that, my whole perspective shifted. I began to savor each step of the journey, knowing that every moment was part of something bigger. And that's when I felt a deep sense of peace. Not because everything in my life was perfect, but because I had finally learned to appreciate everything as it was, right here, right now. Part 13. Learning to let go of control. As my transformation continued, I encountered a difficult lesson: the need to let go of control. For most of my life, I had been trying to control everything. I wanted to manage every aspect of my life, make the perfect decisions, and ensure that every outcome was exactly how I envisioned it. But as I started pushing myself to grow and change, I realized how little control I actually had. The more I tried to control things, the more I found myself overwhelmed and frustrated when life didn't go according to plan. I was spending so much energy trying to steer the course that I wasn't leaving any room for life to unfold naturally. I didn't realize it at the time, but my obsession with control was holding me back from fully embracing the process of growth. I had to learn the hard way that no matter how much effort I put into planning and controlling outcomes, I couldn't predict every twist and turn. Life is unpredictable, and sometimes the things that happen to us are completely outside of our control. Instead of resisting this truth, I had to accept it. Letting go of control wasn't easy. and it wasn't something that happened overnight. There were times when I was afraid to step back and allow things to unfold naturally. What if I failed? What if things didn't work out? But the more I practiced letting go, the more I saw that it wasn't about giving up or becoming passive. It was about trusting the process and allowing myself to flow with it. The freedom that came with letting go of control was like nothing I had ever experienced. I started to embrace uncertainty and discomfort, knowing that these were the places where real growth happened. Instead of trying to control the outcome, I began to focus on the actions I could control, my attitude, my effort, and my willingness to learn. Everything else, I had to surrender. I learned that life is much richer when you stop trying to control every detail and start trusting the journey. You can't force growth, and you can't control everything that happens, but you can control your response to it. Once I understood that, I was able to stop fighting against life and start working with it. Letting go of control didn't mean I stopped caring or trying. It meant that I started living with more openness, more acceptance, and more trust in myself and the process. And in doing so, I found a sense of peace I had never experienced before. Part 14. The power of gratitude in every situation. As I continued on my path of growth, something shifted inside me that I hadn't expected. I began to feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For so long, I had been focused on what was missing in my life, what I didn't have, what I hadn't yet achieved, and what I was still working toward. But as I let go of the need for control and started to embrace life as it was, I discovered something profound. There is power in gratitude, even in the most challenging moments. I had spent so many years overlooking the simple blessings in my life because I was too focused on the bigger picture, always chasing after something more. But as I embraced the present moment and allowed myself to feel grateful for the small things, the people who stood by me, the lessons I had learned, the opportunities one had, I started to see my life in a completely new light. Gratitude became my anchor. It wasn't just about being thankful for the good things. It was about learning to find gratitude in the struggles, the setbacks, and the obstacles that came my way. I began to understand that every challenge was an opportunity for growth, and every failure was a lesson in resilience. The moments that once seemed like setbacks were now seen as stepping stones. What I learned was that gratitude doesn't just shift your mindset, it shifts your entire experience of life. The more I focused on what I had, instead of what I lacked, the more abundant my life felt. Gratitude didn't just change the way I saw the world, it changed the way I felt about myself. I started keeping a daily gratitude journal, jotting down the things I was thankful for each day, no matter how small. Some days, it was easy. A beautiful sunrise, a meaningful conversation, a simple act of kindness. Other days, it was harder to find things to be grateful for. But even on those tough days, I made an effort to find something. Even if it was just the fact that I was still here, still fighting, still learning. By focusing on gratitude, I learned to shift my perspective. Instead of complaining about the things I didn't have or the struggles I was facing, I learned to see the value in every experience, every relationship, and every lesson. The more I practiced gratitude, the more my life began to shift in ways I hadn't expected. It wasn't about everything becoming perfect. It was about shifting my focus to what was already good. Gratitude doesn't just change your attitude. It transforms your entire life. And by incorporating it into my daily routine, I discovered that there was always something to be thankful for, even in the darkest moments. Once I embraced that, my outlook on life was forever changed. Part 15. Embracing the unknown and finding freedom in uncertainty. As I reached the final stages of my transformation, I found myself confronting something that I had always feared: uncertainty. Throughout my life, I had lived with the illusion that certainty was the key to happiness and success. I believed that if I could just have everything figured out, if I knew exactly where I was going, how I was going to get there, and what the future held, I would finally feel at peace. But the more I grew, the more I realized how little control I actually had over what was coming next. No matter how much planning or preparation I put in, life had its own way of throwing curveballs. And it wasn't until I truly accepted this uncertainty that I began to experience the kind of freedom I had been searching for. At first, I resisted the unknown. It felt scary, disorienting, and out of my control. I tried to predict every outcome, to plan every step. But the truth is, no matter how hard you try to control the future, The unknown will always be there, and it will always surprise you. One day, I decided to stop fighting it. I decided to let go of the need for absolute certainty and embrace the mystery of life. I allowed myself to feel the fear, to step into the unknown, and to trust that I would be okay, no matter what happened. That was when I realized, uncertainty doesn't have to be something to fear. It can be something to embrace. By embracing uncertainty, I stopped limiting myself to what was predictable and comfortable. I became open to new experiences, new possibilities, and new opportunities. I learned that it was okay not to have all the answers, that I didn't need to know exactly what the future held. What mattered was my ability to adapt, to stay present, and to trust in my own ability to navigate whatever came my way. This shift in mindset didn't come without its challenges. There were still times when I felt anxious, when the future seemed unclear and daunting. But instead of letting that fear paralyze me, I used it as a reminder that growth only happens when you're willing to step into the unknown. The more I allowed myself to embrace uncertainty, the more freedom I felt. I stopped worrying about the what-ifs and started living in the moment, focusing on what I could control, my choices, my actions, and my attitude. The truth is, life is full of uncertainty. We can't control what happens to us, and we can't predict the future, but we can control how we respond to it. Embracing the unknown is one of the most freeing things you can do. It takes the weight of perfection and control off your shoulders and gives you the freedom to live fully, without fear of what might or might not happen. As I look back on everything I've learned, I realize that the journey doesn't end here. The road ahead is just as uncertain as the one I've walked, but I've learned to embrace it. The freedom I once sought in certainty is now found in the unknown, and that has been the most powerful lesson of all. Part 16. The True Meaning of Success, Living with Purpose. Throughout this entire journey, I realized something essential. Success isn't about achieving a certain status, reaching a specific goal, or accumulating wealth or recognition. For most of my life, I had defined success in these terms, thinking that if I could just hit a particular milestone, I would finally feel like I made it. But as I grew and changed, I came to understand that true success is about living a life of purpose. When I first started making changes, I was driven by the idea of fixing everything, making my career better, my relationships stronger, my personal life more fulfilling. But along the way, I realized that the most significant change wasn't in what I had accomplished or what I had gained. It was in the deeper understanding of why I was doing it all in the first place. Living with purpose meant understanding my values, my passions, and my why. It meant aligning my actions with my true desires, not just what I thought I was supposed to do. I started questioning the goals I was chasing and asking myself, is this what I truly want? Or is it just what I think will make me happy? I realized that many of the things I had been striving for were surface-level markers of success, and while they were important in their own right, they didn't bring me fulfillment on a deeper level. The work I was doing, the relationships I was nurturing, and the way I spent my time were no longer just about checking boxes or achieving external validation. They became about something much more meaningful, contributing to a life that reflected my authentic self. Living with purpose also meant letting go of the idea that success looks the same for everyone. I had spent so much of my life comparing myself to others, measuring my success against their achievements. But the truth is, success is personal. It's about what makes you feel whole, what excites you, and what gives you a sense of meaning and fulfillment. As I embraced this new definition of success, I started to focus on what truly mattered, the relationships that nurtured me, the work that inspired me, and the personal growth that kept me moving forward. I found that when I aligned my life with my purpose, everything else fell into place. The goals I had seemed less daunting because they were driven by something deeper than external expectations. They became part of a broader vision, a vision of living a life that felt authentic and true to who I was. Success, I learned, isn't about having it all figured out or achieving everything on a list. It's about living with intention, following your passions, and making choices that align with your deeper values. When you live with purpose, success becomes less about the destination and more about the journey, about the person you become along the way. And now, as I look at my life, I can finally say that I feel successful, not because I have everything I thought I wanted, but because I'm living a life that feels right. A life that reflects who I am, who I strive to be, and the impact I want to make in the world. And for the first time, that feels like true success.